Prologue. Dusk. The moon was full and bright as the sky darkened. The cries of birds mourned the bitter air. Songs of crickets and piercing howls began to break the quiet as the clouds cleared, allowing the moon to light up the fog-ensnared forest below. With eyes as violet as orchids and magenta hair so sleek, a small girl of no more than 18 years shifted her gaze to the silver moonlight. Sitting cross-legged under a tree, a perturbed frown broke her vacant stare as she spotted the glow of torchlight breaking through the dark of the forest. In her right hand, a piece of parchment, and in her left, a chunk of coal. She swiftly returned both to the satchel on her right side and climbed to her feet. Torchlight. She gripped the hilt of her sword, its sheath sitting comfortably on her left side, attached to her leather belt. It was a full moon. Who could possibly be out this late? Dismay warped her face. The enemy, perhaps. Warlocks. Had they finally found her? The thought horrified her as she snatched her purple cape from the ground and threw it over her shoulders. She pulled a mask over her mouth and nose and swiftly disappeared into the trees without a trace. After 2 years on the run, she'd not let Gahi's warlocks catch her now. The torchlight grew nearer as the girl fled, leaving not a hint that she had been there. A small group of men armed with wooden spears and bows followed the muddy path that passed by the place she had been sitting, lighting their way with the torches they held firmly in their hands. One of the men pulled a small cart full of pelts and dead rabbits behind him. Their eyes darted around frantically as the wind picked up, the brush around them rustling eerily. The fur of their hooded coats blew in all directions as panic quickly gripped them all. Hunters were always careless. Carrying torches at night only made them beacons for nearby predators. But they were human, and the humans of Alvengard were always oblivious to their own stupidity.
Why would we even stay out at this time? We know damn well it's not safe outside the city walls after dusk.
The single dwarf among them protested as he turned around to see if they were being followed.
Dean, we're safe, right? I knew we shouldn't have gone after that stupid lichen fiend. We didn't even catch the damn thing.
I don't even know why we came after the damn creature. It's literally impossible to tell them apart from a tree unless you really look, and the fact that it's almost pitch black out here really doesn't help.
The pale, frail-looking blonde-haired man beside him mumbled. Dean led the men. His natural height and broad shoulders helped assert his authority. He had his dull blue eyes fixed on the muddy path ahead and scowled with irritancy as he heard his comrades complaining. He sighed and dragged his spare hand over his face.
We did what we came to do. Now let's just get back,
he grumbled.
Don't worry, guys. We're close now. I think,
replied the dark-skinned, red-haired man as he looked down at him, pulling his long hair into a ponytail. The dwarf scoffed, his ear-length hair shimmering an odd purple in the torchlight. He frowned in panic as he looked up at his assuring companion.
You think, Tom?
He scowled, his hazel eyes filled with worry.
Think isn't helping. We came too far out. We won't be back before dawn.
You know what I think?
The blonde hunter then mumbled as he looked around cautiously. Rolling his eyes, the dwarf scoffed.
Sure, we all want to know what smart-ass Harry thinks. The same guy that got us in this situation in the first place.
Will you shut up?
Dean growled irritably as he smacked a gnat away from his balding head, glaring back at them.
The last thing we need right now is to give away our position to whatever lurks in these woods after dark. Finn Farmstead isn't too far from these woods. We'll get there soon enough.
Ignoring him, Harry gulped, fear quickly building in his dull blue eyes, his blonde fringe blowing gently in the light breeze.
I think we've taken a wrong turn and are headed straight for...
Suddenly, a branch fell from one of the trees and landed in front of them as they all screeched in shock. The crickets abruptly silenced as the grass around them rustled loudly, nothing but the sound of the whistling night wind circling them like a wolf in the dark.
what was that?
Tom asked as he gripped the arm of their leader. Although Dean seemed to be the sternest looking of them all, even he looked panicked by the commotion. But then, he pulled his arm free from Tom and straightened his fur-collared cloak.
Get a hold of yourselves, men.
He instructed, looking back at his group. However, the sudden horrified looks on their pale faces quickly forced his stern frown to mold into a confused scowl.
What is it?
He demanded, watching as they all stared up above him, shivering and whimpering. Quickly he looked up, searching the trees in disarray, panicking. As the leaves began to rustle loudly, he stepped back and joined his group. They all looked around frantically as twigs snapped all around them, the sound of snarling, panting, and heavy feet hitting the ground starting to surround them. Then, as Dean slowly pulled his spear free from its sheath on his back, a low, quiet growl echoed through the bushes. The group moved closer to each other, looking in all directions as they gripped their weapons tightly.
Something is watching.
Harry said slowly, scanning the darkness with his eyes.
Morgan, do you have any of the concealing potion that Opus gave us?
Dean mumbled cautiously, scanning the bushes with his eyes. The dwarf gulped and scoffed.
We used all of it on the fiend earlier.
Damn it.
Dean grumbled, worry smothering his face. Harry then laughed nervously as he fiddled with his bowl-cut blonde hair.
It's probably just an elf or something, playing tricks on us, thinking it's funny. Right?
He asked, nudging Dean, seeing that both Tom and Morgan were panicking. Unsure, they all looked at each other strangely, but then pointed their spears forward, frowning as they searched the darkness for whatever they knew was watching them. Suddenly, as the snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves grew louder, another huge branch fell and landed in front of them with a loud crash. Several panicked birds flew away, vigorously flapping their wings as they shrieked in fear. Quickly, the four hunters all looked up again and froze, looks of utter terror covering their pale faces as fear gripped their stiff, trembling bodies. A huge, black, dog-like creature was glowering at them from above, its bright yellow eyes glowing, reflecting the light from their torches. The dog widened its jaws, revealing fangs that were like that of a saber cat, two larger front teeth grinning at them from the front of its mouth. The creature's ears were pricked up, long and sharply pointed at their ends, rips and tears in its mangled black flesh. It licked its teeth slowly with its long, green, snake-like tongue, and as it glared at each of them, it gripped onto the branch with its huge, dagger-like talons. Dean stood in front of the others and glared back at the beast.
Black dogs,
He said quietly.
just stay calm. It's just one. It won't attack us alone.
He assured, holding his spear tightly in his right hand, his torch in his left.
Calm!
Harry panicked.
Black dogs are hunters! They never come out alone!
Tom nodded in panic, his long red hair falling out of place into his face.
He's never wrong.
Before Dean could convince his men otherwise, shimmering yellow eyes began to appear all around them, glowing in the darkness, in the trees, in the bushes, and from every angle around them. They were surrounded. They stood back to back, holding their spears firmly, trying to warn off the beasts by waving their torches. But black dogs weren't afraid of fire. The creatures on the ground started to circle them, baring their devilish fangs, growling and snarling as the men continued to wave their spears and torches around with no success.
This isn't working.
Tom called, his hazel eyes darting rapidly from each dog as they prowled through the darkness. Harry shrieked and panicked, turning his back on the darkness behind him, failing to notice the stalking dog in the bush a few feet away. Before he could even try to defend himself, the dog leaped out from the bush and clamped its jaw shut around his shin. He screamed in horror as he was pulled to the ground and dragged away in the blink of an eye. As he was dragged away, his torch hit the ground, the flames instantly vanishing. His companions moved to try and help him, but the other black dogs burst out of the darkness and defended their packmate.
No!
Dean yelled furiously, trying to force his way through the pack to grab his companion, but there were far too many. As a dog leaped forward and went for his arm, he stumbled back, dropping his torch. There was no way he could get to Harry. He had no choice but to stay with his remaining comrades and help them fend off the beasts.
They got Harry.
Morgan cried, waving his torch around as furiously as his small body would allow him, the dog snapping at him from a few feet away, toying with him. Tom yelped in fear as he also waved his torch around.
What do we do?
He yelled, his red hair flying around as he swayed his entire body, trying to scare the beasts off. Overwhelmed, Dean looked around, gripping his spear tightly, unsure of what to do. Should he leave Tom and Morgan and attempt to save Harry? Or should he stay and help them? He didn't know, but he was sure that either way, there wasn't an easy way out of it. He was now torchless, and he knew that alone, he was no match for the pack of dogs. However, just as Dean was about to bark orders at his remaining comrades, a strange, ear-piercing shriek filled the air. It was unlike anything any of them had heard, but they knew for sure that it wasn't a black dog. No dog made that noise. A blinding light began to shimmer in the distance, getting brighter and brighter, closer and closer. It left the hunters and dogs alike standing there like startled deer. What could it be? Was it another, more deadly predator attracted by the dogs? Could it be help? Had people come out looking for them? They could only hope.
What now?
Morgan cried, taking his eyes off the incoming light to look around frantically. Just moments later, from the darkness of the trees, a shimmering white unicorn emerged, its horn pointed forward as a burst of bright, white light glowed around it, emanating from its silky white coat. Harry screeched in horror from the darkness not too far away. Dean, Tom, and Morgan stood there, watching as the unicorn raced past them, the dogs quickly shifting their attention onto it. The pack lost all interest in the men and began chasing the unicorn, leaving Harry alone in the bushes. With the dogs distracted, the three hunters snuck past and into the cover of the trees, quickly locating their injured comrade as he whimpered quietly, blood oozing from a huge wound on his shin. As Tom handed his torch to Dean, he quickly tended to his companion's wound. Dean stared out of the darkness, watching as the unicorn tried to desperately fight off the pack. The dogs pounced at it, tearing at its mane as it shrieked and kicked its legs back, becoming swiftly overwhelmed by the number of dogs that had emerged from the darkness. Morgan tugged on Dean's coat.
What do we do?
He asked,
They're gonna kill it, and if they kill it, they're gonna come straight for us.
gripping the hilt of his spear. Dean frowned.
We should help it.
But their help wasn't needed. Just as a black dog was about to pounce at the unicorn from behind, a small, masked, hooded figure suddenly emerged from the trees, wielding a purple, shimmering sword, a glistening yellow-white crystal embedded in its blade just above the sharp-edged crossguard. The figure wielding it was no taller than 5 feet, swifter than anything the men had seen. But the thing that shocked them the most was that this mysterious hero was, in fact, a heroine. Her chest gave that away almost instantly, it being the only thing they could make out in the commotion. They remained in the cover of the trees, watching as she joined the unicorn, slicing the head off the dog that had tried to pounce at the unicorn from behind. The black dogs growled and simultaneously attacked from all directions, but the pair began to fight them off. The unicorn kicked at them with its back legs, the girl cutting them down with her unusual sword. The startled hunters watched as one by one the black dogs were slain effortlessly by the mysterious duo. Some of the dogs tried to flee after half their pack was slain, but the sword wielder leaped over them and heartlessly sliced their heads from their bodies, blood splashing all over the trees. But one dog was too far to be reached. The hooded girl held out her left hand, an electrifying light green light quickly wrapping around her arm. With a flash of green, beams of light exploded from the escaping black dog's eyes and mouth. As its mangled corpse fell to the ground, the girl sharply turned to face the panicked hunters, who immediately recognized what she was.
Warlock!
Dean yelled with hostility as the girl started to immediately approach them. Instantly, Morgan threw his torch at the warlock, but missed completely. He then dropped to his hands and knees along with Tom.
Please.
Don't kill us.
They both begged, trembling with fear as she made her way over to them. The warlock sheathed her sword, her eyes focused on the wound on Harry's leg. As she reached them, without a word, she aggressively grabbed hold of Harry's leg and stared closely at the wound. He yelped in fear and pulled away.
No! Spare me!
He pleaded as Dean moved in front of him defensively. Dean held his spear and torch forward as he glared down at the warlock.
What do you want, wretch?
He demanded as his comrades cowered behind him. Whimpering, Tom wrapped his arms around Dean's leg and whimpered.
It's going to kill us.
He whispered, petrified. But the warlock stared up at him and frowned.
I'm not here to hurt you.
She said calmly, her voice quiet and stern.
I just came to kill the black dogs.
Her voice startled them all. Dean frowned, confused. She sounded younger than all of them and couldn't possibly be older than 15. She was as small as a child. Katharina, however, was no child. She tucked the strands of her magenta hair that had fallen from her hood during the fight away from her violet eyes and reached into the satchel on her side. This wasn't the first time she had come to the rescue of careless, stupid hunters. It was easy to ignore their gawping eyes, their fearful utters and flinches every time she so much as sighed. Humans and warlocks were enemies and had been since the war that had caused this land to become something like a pit of dread and oppression. And of course, after seeing her cast ethos, they'd instantly suspect she was a warlock. Warlocks were pretty much the last remaining humanoids that could channel their ethos and use it in such a way she just had. From her satchel, she retrieved a small piece of paper and stared at the list written upon it. There were many scribbled-out notes of hunting contracts she had already completed, and near the very bottom of the paper was a note that read, "Black Dogs, Fen Woods." An easy task. She pulled a piece of coal from her satchel, crossed off the black dog note, and returned the items to her satchel. Now all she had to do was head back to the old man that had given her this bounty. But what about the 4 startled men before her? If she left them here without any idea of where they had to go, they'd likely become something's midnight snack. She didn't care for humans, but she liked to believe that she was better than every other warlock to set foot in this land. She wasn't a heartless, cold-blooded murderer. The hunters all stared at one another in confusion, unsure of what to say or do as the warlock eyed them. They were all frozen in fear. Not even Dean could find the courage to attempt to attack. He knew what warlocks were capable of. Ethos was such a powerful weapon, and he knew what she could do to him if he even tried to attack. All he could do was stand there with his terrified comrades.
You're not gonna kill us?
Harry whimpered, gritting his teeth in pain as blood continued to ooze from his wound. She scoffed.
No. What would be the point in that?
She asked as she walked over to the unicorn and mounted it.
You should get that scene too.
She instructed as she pointed to the injury on Harry's leg.
Black dogs are venomous.
Dean scowled skeptically.
Why would you, a warlock, help us?
He asked, still pointing his weapon at her. He had no idea what to make of it. Warlocks were the most dangerous foe in Alvengard. They were humanity's greatest enemy, the cause of their endangerment, the reason they had retreated behind walls not too many years ago. Surely she was toying with them. She had obviously come to kill them. Hadn't she? He scowled, waiting for her answer. Morgan gulped.
Are you gonna enslave us?
He asked unsurely. The warlock frowned.
I just came to kill the dogs.
She repeated.
You should leave now. This path leads deeper into the forest.
She said, pointing down at the mud path the hunters had been stopped on.
The path to the nearest village is this way.
She said, tapping her unicorn's side, making it face towards a wide opening in the trees. Morgan scrambled to his feet.
Are you here to guide us?
He asked desperately as Harry and Tom whimpered in fear behind Dean, who was still scowling skeptically at the warlock, watching her every move.
No.
She said plainly. Before any of them could say anything else, she then tapped the unicorn's side once again. It grunted quietly and began to gallop into the darkness, dragging any light there had been with it. Left in the darkness of the night, the hunters looked at one another in confliction. They then looked around at the dead black dogs, baffled by what had just happened. But there was no time to sit around and question it. Their comrade was injured.
Did that just happen?
Tom asked as they all helped Harry to his feet.
Warlocks are supposed to want to kill us.
Harry groaned, struggling to stand even with Tom and Morgan's help.
Why didn't she kill us?
Dean sheathed his spear.
Let's move. We know what warlocks are like. They enjoy toying with us.
He said cautiously as he took hold of Harry himself, helping him walk as he held the last remaining torch in his right hand. He then looked back at Tom and Morgan.
Stay alert.
He instructed.
There could be more warlocks out here. Or creatures far worse than black dogs.
He warned, starting to lead the way, following the directions the warlock had given them. Following his leader, Tom frowned in worry.
Why are we going the way she said then?
He called, his panicked voice hushed.
This is the way to the village.
Dean quietly replied as Harry whimpered in pain. Tom frowned unsurely.
But how do we know that warlock won't be waiting for us somewhere? She could be leading us to her camp or something.
Morgan nodded slowly.
She probably knew she couldn't take on 3 of us at once. She's probably waiting with her other warlock friends.
He yelled confidently.
Shh!
Dean called aggressively, glaring back at them. Limping, Harry looked around cautiously.
I don't like this.
He mumbled. They all followed the path for a short while. Even with their torch, they couldn't see 5 feet in front of them, and the eerie silence was increasing their fear as each moment passed. Looking around as a light breeze blew past, Morgan gulped.
I don't think we should go this way.
He suggested. Tom nodded as he also looked around.
Warlocks don't save people. She's waiting for us.
Let's just get a move on.
Dean grumbled.
The sooner we get out of this forest, the sooner we can...
No, we should go the other way.
Tom then protested, cutting Dean off.
Don't you see? She wants us to go that way so she can kill us. She had no reason to save us. Warlocks are the enemy.
They all stopped and looked at one another, glancing at the darkness around them. Dean couldn't deny it. Tom was right. That warlock had saved them, yes, but she had to have done it for some ulterior reason. Was she leading them into a trap? Most likely. Warlocks were tricksters. Bad ones. Of course, she was leading them towards her clan. She was just a small girl. There was no way she could have taken them on alone. That had to be it. Dean wasn't going to fall for it. He wasn't going to lead his comrades into any more danger.
Fine,
He agreed.
but we better go quickly.
He called, turning to walk the other way. Relieved, his men followed as he continued to lead the way with Harry at his side. However, as they walked, a quiet rustling and distant snap echoed from behind them. Having heard it, Harry gasped quietly.
Did you guys hear that?
He asked.
Let's move!
Dean called irritably, looking back at Morgan and Tom who were falling behind.
Dean,
Harry muttered.
did you?
Suddenly, Dean's torch was blown out, a quiet snarl beginning to echo around him as he stopped walking. He looked around frantically, letting go of Harry so that he could wield his spear. He then glanced back at his comrades. Morgan and Tom rushed to help Harry to his feet, the 3 of them swiftly following Dean as he quickly led the way forward, desperate to find a way out of the dark, ominous forest. Grunting painfully, Harry sniffled.
Are we lost?
He asked, tears forming in his blue eyes. Irritated, Dean looked back at his men.
Come on!
He called. He then looked ahead again, but failed to notice the tall, broad shadow beginning to descend over him. Before he could yell at his comrades again, a huge, hazel-colored, wolf-like beast emerged from the darkness ahead, its eyes shimmering a bright, blood red. The hunters had no time to react. The beast snatched Dean's body in one of its human-like hands and immediately sank its razor-sharp teeth into his neck, ripping his head from his body. As blood sprayed everywhere, the others screeched in horror. Tom and Morgan abandoned their injured comrade without hesitation, letting him drop to the ground as they tried to scurry away.
Werewolf!
Tom screamed, but before he even made it a few feet away, the beast grabbed him by his leg and threw his body around like a rag doll. As he slammed against a tree, he fell silent, a pool of blood starting to form around him. The werewolf roared ferociously, watching as Morgan waddled away, but he wasn't going to get far. The beast dropped to all fours and raced towards him, pouncing towards one of the trees. It leaped from tree to tree until it was directly over the fleeing hunter, and as he screamed in terror, the wolf dropped down from the tree and landed on top of him, crushing him beneath its feet. Remembering that there was a fourth hunter, the werewolf stood up onto its hind legs and searched the area with its eyes for the blonde man, but there was no sign of anyone else. It snarled quietly but quickly turned its attention back to the hunter it had crushed beneath its feet. Without further hindrance, it sunk its teeth into its kill, beginning its feast. The realm of Alvengard was no safe place. It existed with one simple rule: only the strong would survive.